He was the undisputed face of American youth, the energetic, fast-talking kid with a skateboard and a time machine who defined the 1980s. He moved with a kinetic, electric grace, sprinting across movie screens and capturing the heart of an entire generation. For a brief, dazzling moment in cinematic history, he possessed the ultimate superpower. He could control time. But behind the billion-dollar box office and that famous, boyish smile lies a reality of unimaginable cruelty. At 64 years old, Michael J. Fox is fighting a grueling 35-year battle against a thief that lives inside his own brain. There is a devastating, almost Shakespearean irony to his life. The man whose legacy is forever tied to moving backward and forward in time was struck, at the absolute peak of his youth, by Parkinson's disease, an incurable, progressive neurological shadow that systematically strips away a person's control over their own movement, trapping them in an agonizing present. How does the most kinetic, restless actor in Hollywood survive when his own body slowly becomes a prison? What dark, desperate secrets did he hide from the world for 7 agonizing years, smiling for the cameras while his private world collapsed? And what does it teach us about the profound depths of human love when a Hollywood marriage survives the absolute worst news a doctor can deliver? Before we answer these questions, we must go back to the beginning. To understand the hero who refuses to surrender, you must first know the boy who was always running. The boy who never stopped running, and the illusion of control. There is a profound, almost invisible poetry to the way a human being moves through the world. Some people move with the slow, heavy deliberation of a mountain. Others move like water, adapting quietly to whatever vessel holds them. But Michael J. Fox did not move like a mountain, and he certainly did not move like water. From the very beginning, Michael moved like electricity. He was pure, unadulterated kinetic energy. To truly understand the heartbreaking gravity of the battle he fights today at 64 years old, to understand the absolute cruelty of Parkinson's disease, you must first understand how completely, how magnificently, this man once commanded his own physical body. You cannot comprehend the tragedy of the cage until you witness how beautifully the bird used to fly. Born Michael Andrew Fox on June 9, 1961, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, his childhood was defined by constant, unrelenting motion. His father, William, was a 25-year veteran of the Canadian Forces, a strict, disciplined man whose career required the family to pull up their roots and relocate to different military bases across the country every few years. For young Michael, this transient lifestyle meant he was perpetually the new kid in school. But unlike the towering, brooding cinematic heroes who could simply intimidate their classmates into leaving them alone, Michael faced a severe, undeniable physical disadvantage. He was incredibly small. Even as he reached adulthood, he would only stand at 5 feet, 4 inches tall. In the harsh, primitive, and often merciless hierarchy of a middle school playground, a boy who is significantly shorter than his peers is immediately identified as prey. He was an easy target for bullies, a small object in a world dominated by larger, rougher kids. But Michael refused to be a victim. If he could not win a fight with his fists, he realized he would have to win it with his feet and his mind. He developed a brilliant, rapid-fire sense of humor and a terrifyingly fast intellect. He learned to talk his way out of dangerous situations, firing off jokes and sarcastic remarks with the speed of a machine gun. And when his mouth couldn't save him, his legs did. He learned how to run. He learned how to dodge, how to weave, and how to use his small stature as an absolute advantage. I was a small kid, Michael later reflected, analyzing the very foundation of his legendary persona. I had to be fast on my feet and fast with my mouth. If you're the little guy, you learn early on that stillness is dangerous. You have to keep moving. He essentially weaponized his hyperactivity. When he discovered the high school drama department, it was a revelation. The stage was the only place on earth where his boundless, vibrating energy was not seen as a distraction, but as a gift. He realized that physical comedy, the precise timing of a pratfall, the quick, sharp turn of the head, the effortless slide across the hood of a car, was a language he spoke more fluently than anyone else. His body was a perfectly tuned instrument. Every single movement, no matter how chaotic it appeared, was meticulously controlled by his brilliant mind. By the late 1970s, that kinetic ambition could no longer be contained within the borders of Canada. At 18 years old, possessing a high school dropout's resume and a pocket full of impossible dreams, Michael convinced his father to drive him down the Pacific coast to the glittering, unforgiving epicenter of the entertainment industry, Los Angeles. When he arrived in Hollywood, he added the middle initial J to his stage name, an homage to character actor Michael J. Pollard, because he thought Michael A. Fox sounded far too arrogant. He was ready to conquer the world. But Hollywood is a city that loves to break the hopeful. The early 1980s delivered a brutal, agonizing reality check. The charming, fast-talking teenager found himself completely swallowed by the massive, indifferent machinery of the film industry. The roles he managed to secure were sparse and insignificant. Very quickly, the dream turned into a desperate, grinding fight for literal survival. The poverty he endured was not the glamorous, temporary struggle often depicted in movies. It was miserable and humiliating. He lived in a tiny, cramped apartment in Brentwood, drowning in debt. He was so incredibly broke that he could not afford to buy groceries. He survived for weeks on a diet of cheap macaroni and cheese. When things got truly desperate, he resorted to selling off sections of his sectional sofa, piece by piece, to his neighbors just to scrape together enough coins to buy a hot meal. Perhaps the most striking, visceral image of this dark period was his communication with the outside world. Michael was so impoverished that the phone company disconnected his apartment's telephone line. To speak with his agent or his parents back in Canada, he had to walk down the street to a Pioneer Chicken fast food restaurant. He would stand outside in the smoggy Los Angeles heat, feeding dimes into a greasy public payphone, waiting for the call that might finally change his life. He was broke. He was starving. He was a 5'4" Canadian kid getting beaten down by the biggest, most ruthless industry on the planet. In 1982, standing at the absolute edge of surrender, Michael made a quiet, painful decision. He was going to pack his bags. He was going to accept defeat, return to the freezing winters of Canada, and perhaps find a job working in construction or an office. The great Hollywood experiment had failed. But fate has a peculiar habit of waiting until a man is completely out of breath before handing him a second wind. Just as he was preparing to leave, the public payphone outside Pioneer Chicken rang. His agent was on the other end of the line. A television network was casting a new sitcom about a family of former 1960s hippies raising their children in conservative, money-driven 1980s. They were desperately looking for an actor to play the couple's eldest son, a hyper-conservative, briefcase-carrying, sharply dressed teenage Republican named Alex P. Keaton. The show's creator, Gary David Goldberg, initially did not want Michael for the role. He thought Michael was too short, too jittery, and entirely wrong for the part. But when Michael J. Fox walked into the audition room and began to read the dialogue, the sheer, undeniable force of his kinetic energy completely overwhelmed the executives. He didn't just read the lines. He attacked them. He paced the room. He gestured wildly. He delivered the political jargon with a razor-sharp, comedic timing that left the entire room in hysterics. He possessed an incredible, magical ability to take a character who was written to be arrogant and unlikable and infuse him with such deep, vulnerable charm that you couldn't help but fall in love with him. He won the role of Alex P. Keaton on Family Ties. When the show premiered in the fall of 1982, the trajectory of Michael J. Fox's life shifted from a desperate crawl to a supersonic ascent. Family Ties became a cultural juggernaut, drawing 1/3 of all American households to their television screens every single week. Michael went from selling his couch for food to winning 3 consecutive Emmy Awards. He had done it. He had outrun the poverty. He had outrun the bullies from his childhood. The boy who was told he was too small had used his lightning-fast mind and his perfectly controlled body to conquer the American television landscape. But television was only the beginning. As the calendar turned toward the defining year of 1985, a script about a time-traveling DeLorean was quietly making its way to his desk. The boy who never stopped running was about to step onto the silver screen and literally learn how to control time. He was standing at the absolute pinnacle of human potential, moving faster than any man alive. But what he did not know, what nobody could possibly have known, was that the universe was quietly preparing to steal the one thing he relied on most: his ability to move. The lightning strike of 1985 and the illusion of time. To fully comprehend the cultural monument that Michael J. Fox became, we must isolate one specific, completely unprecedented year in the history of Hollywood, 1985. It was a year that defied logic, a year where a young actor essentially bent the laws of physics and human endurance to his absolute will. By the beginning of 1985, Michael was already the undisputed king of American television. Family Ties was a massive, immovable anchor of the NBC network, and his character, Alex P. Keaton, was a beloved national obsession. But the silver screen was calling, and it was called with a script about a time-traveling DeLorean, a mad scientist, and a teenager who accidentally alters the fabric of his own existence. Director Robert Zemeckis and producer Steven Spielberg had originally cast another actor, Eric Stoltz, in the lead role of Marty McFly for Back to the Future. They shot for several weeks, but a quiet, creeping panic had settled over production. The film was simply not working. The tone was too dark. The comedic timing was missing. Zemeckis realized they needed a specific kind of magic. They needed the rapid-fire, kinetic, impossibly agile energy that only Michael J. Fox possessed. They begged the producers of Family Ties to let Michael shoot the film. The creator of the television show, Gary David Goldberg, initially refused. He was terrified of exhausting his young star. But eventually, a grueling, almost inhumane compromise was struck. Michael would be allowed to do the movie, but only if he did not miss a single minute of his television commitments. What followed was a schedule of such punishing, brutal exhaustion that has become legendary in the halls of Hollywood history. For 3.5 months, Michael J. Fox effectively lived 2 separate lives, completely abandoning the biological necessity of sleep. His day would begin at 10 a.m. under the bright, safe, fluorescent lights of the Paramount Television studio. For 8 hours, he would memorize lines, hit his marks, and deliver the sharp, comedic dialogue of Alex P. Keaton to a live studio audience. Then, at 6 p.m., the moment the director yelled "cut," a studio driver would shove Michael into the back of a station wagon. As the car sped through the darkening streets of Los Angeles toward the Universal Studios backlit, Michael would eat a cold box dinner in the backseat, strip off his suit and tie, and change into the iconic denim jacket, red puffy vest, and Nike sneakers of Marty McFly. He would arrive on the cold, damp, smoke-filled set of Back to the Future by 6:30 p.m., and he would begin to run. And he ran. He skateboarded behind moving trucks. He dove over the hoods of cars. He played a heavy Gibson guitar with absolute, explosive physical intensity. He worked deep into the night, often until 2:30 a.m., and sometimes until the sun began to rise. A driver would then carry his practically unconscious body back to his bed. He would sleep for perhaps 2 or 3 hours, wake up, and do it all over again, reflecting on this magnificent, blurry marathon of pure survival. Michael later perfectly described the surreal nature of his existence. "I was just running on adrenaline, ignorance, and youth. I was essentially a guy who was sleeping in a box, waking up and acting. I'd be on the set of Back to the Future at 2 in the morning, and I'd be so tired I wouldn't even know which character I was playing. I'd just wait for someone to yell action and hope the right words came out of my mouth." But look at the performance he delivered under those impossible conditions. It is a masterclass in physical control. Every movement of Marty McFly, the way he looks at his watch, the frantic panic shaking of his hands when he realizes he is fading from a photograph, the effortless, gravity-defying slides across the asphalt, was executed with the absolute precision of an Olympic gymnast. His body was a supreme instrument. It was a perfectly tuned machine, operating at a frequency that no other actor of his generation could possibly match. On July 3rd, 1985, Back to the Future exploded into theaters across America. It was not just a hit, it was a global phenomenon. It became the highest-grossing film of the year. Overnight, the boy who used to sell pieces of his sofa just to buy macaroni and cheese became the biggest, most universally beloved movie star on the planet. His face was on the cover of Time magazine. He was on lunchboxes. He was on millions of posters hanging in the bedrooms of teenagers around the world. He had done the impossible by pushing his physical body to the absolute brink. He had conquered both television and film simultaneously. He was the ultimate master of motion. He was the boy who controlled time. But this is where the story of Michael J. Fox breaks the heart in a way that no cinematic tragedy ever could. When we, as an audience, look back at the brilliant, vibrant footage of Michael from 1985 today, we do not just feel the warm, comforting glow of nostalgia. For those of us who have lived long enough to understand the cruel, unpredictable nature of human biology, we look at those images with profound, aching melancholy. We watch him sprinting across the screen, moving with such flawless, incredible speed, and we want to scream at the screen. We want to tell him to slow down. We want to warn him. Because we know the terrifying truth that he did not know. We know that while he was standing on the absolute summit of the world, running faster than time itself, a microscopic, deeply sinister betrayal was already beginning to unfold deep within the architecture of his own brain. Parkinson's disease is a deeply mysterious, progressive condition. It occurs when the neurons in the brain that produce dopamine, the vital chemical responsible for coordinating smooth, controlled physical movement, begin to quietly, prematurely die off. Medical experts believe that the disease is often silently gathering strength for years, sometimes decades, before the very first physical symptom ever manifests. Which means that in 1985, as he was dazzling the world with his physical perfection, the biological clock of the disease was already ticking. The ultimate irony of his existence was silently being written. The universe was handing him the keys to the world, making him an international icon specifically because of his incredible physical kinetic energy, all while secretly preparing to violently strip that exact ability away from him. He had mastered time travel on the silver screen, but he was completely defenseless against the relentless, ticking clock of his own biology. Michael survived the 1980s as the golden boy of Hollywood. He transitioned into his late 20s, falling deeply in love and marrying the beautiful actress Tracy Pollan in 1988, believing that the magnificent, high-speed roller coaster of his life would never slow down. But the 1990s were waiting, and in the autumn of 1991, on a humid morning in a hotel room in Florida, the invisible thief that had been quietly stalking him finally decided to step out of the shadows. The boy who was famous for moving fast was about to experience a movement he absolutely could not control, and a single, terrifying twitch of a finger was about to alter the course of his magnificent life forever. The twitch and the terrifying diagnosis. There's a profound, terrifying fragility to human happiness. We spend decades climbing the mountain, enduring the freezing winds, the poverty, and the relentless rejections, believing that once we finally reach the summit, we will be granted a permanent exemption from suffering. By the autumn of 1991, Michael J. Fox was standing firmly on that magnificent summit. He was 30 years old. He had successfully transitioned from television idol to global movie star. He had married the love of his life, Tracy Pollan, and they had just welcomed their first beautiful child, a son named Sam. He was wealthy, universally adored, and possessed a career that most actors do not even dare to dream of. The script of his life was entirely, impeccably flawless. But tragedy rarely sends a warning, and it absolutely never respects a perfect script. In November 1991, Michael was in Gainesville, Florida, shooting a romantic comedy called Doc Hollywood. After a long night of drinking and celebrating with friends, a typical, carefree evening for a young superstar, he woke up in his hotel room with a pounding hangover. As he lay in bed, waiting for the headache to subside, he noticed something strange. His left pinky finger was moving. It was not a voluntary stretch or a muscular spasm from a hard workout. It was a continuous, rhythmic, fluttering tremor. It moved with a strange, autonomous animation, as if the tiny finger had suddenly developed a mind of its own. Michael stared at his hand. He tried to command it to stop. He willed his brain to send the signal, the same way he had commanded his body to leap over cars, skateboard across asphalt, and perform miraculous feats of physical comedy for years. But the finger did not listen. It just kept fluttering. In the immediate aftermath, human psychology deploys its most powerful defense mechanism, absolute denial. Michael rationalized the tremor. He convinced himself it was just a pinched nerve from performing his own stunts. He blamed it on the heavy drinking from a night before. He told himself he had simply slept on his arm wrong. He was 30 years old, possessing the most agile, perfectly tuned physical instrument in Hollywood. The idea that his body was failing him was completely, mathematically impossible. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks bled into months, the fluttering did not stop. It began to spread. The tremor crept up from his pinky finger into his hand, and eventually a subtle, terrifying stiffness began to invade his left shoulder. The illusion of a pinched nerve could no longer hold. A cold, creeping dread began to settle in his stomach. In 1992, desperate for an explanation, Michael flew to New York City to meet with one of the top neurologists in the country. He sat in a sterile, brightly lit examination room, far removed from the glamorous movie sets he was used to. The doctor subjected him to a series of cold, clinical tests. He asked Michael to tap his nose, to walk down a hallway, to push against the doctor's hands. And then the doctor sat down, looked at the brightest star of the 1980s, and delivered a verdict that fundamentally shattered the universe. You have early-onset Parkinson's disease. For a moment, the word simply hung in the air, completely devoid of meaning. Parkinson's disease was an affliction of the elderly. It was a disease that caused grandfathers to shuffle their feet and grandmothers to lose their balance. It was an incurable, progressive, degenerative neurological disorder caused by the dying of dopamine-producing cells in the brain. It was not something that happened to a 30-year-old kid who had just played a time-traveling teenager. Recalling the absolute, suffocating terror of that moment, Michael later described the experience with a quote that strips away all the Hollywood bravado and exposes the raw, bleeding nerve of human vulnerability. It was incomprehensible. It was like someone saying, "You're made of glass." The doctor told me I would be able to work for another 10 years. If I was lucky. I just remember thinking, "You have made a mistake. You don't know who I am. I am Michael J. Fox. I buy my way out of things. I negotiate my way out of things. I charm my way out of things. But you cannot charm Parkinson's." Pay close attention to the absolute cruelty of the doctor's timeline. You have 10 good years left to work. For any human being, an incurable medical diagnosis is a catastrophic blow. But consider the specific, agonizing poetry of this disease striking the specific man. Michael J. Fox did not build his empire on a deep, booming baritone voice like James Earl Jones. He did not build his career on a chiseled, mountainous physique like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He built his entire artistic identity, his massive fortune, and his global legacy on kinetic movement. His absolute superpower was his physical timing, the ability to slide perfectly across a floor, to gesture frantically, to convey 1,000 complex emotions through the rapid, lightning-fast twitch of his facial muscles. And now, a doctor was telling him that the universe had dispatched a neurological thief into his brain. The disease was not just going to make him shake. It was going to make him stiff. Parkinson's causes facial masking, a symptom that literally freezes the muscles of the face, erasing a person's ability to smile or show emotion. It causes freezing of gait, turning a man's legs into heavy blocks of cement. The disease was tailor-made to destroy the very things that made Michael J. Fox a genius. It was going to slowly, systematically lock the most energetic man in the world inside a prison of his own freezing flesh. When Michael walked out of that neurologist's office and stepped onto the busy, chaotic streets of Manhattan, the world around him was exactly the same. The yellow cabs were honking. The pedestrians were rushing by. But for Michael, the timeline of his existence had been violently, permanently altered. He was staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. In the immediate aftermath of the diagnosis, a crushing, suffocating paranoia took hold of him. Hollywood is an industry built entirely on the illusion of perfection. It is a machine that worships youth and vitality, and it ruthlessly discards the broken, the sick, and the flawed. Michael knew, with absolute certainty, that if the studios, the directors, and the insurance companies found out he had an incurable neurological disease, his career would be instantly, brutally terminated. He would become an uninsurable liability. He would become an object of public pity. He could not allow that to happen. He had a new wife. He had an infant son. He had an empire to protect. And so, the man who had spent his entire life performing for the cameras made a desperate, terrifying decision. He was going to give the greatest, most exhausting acting performance of his entire life. But he was going to do it off-screen. He was going to lie to the world. He buried the medical files. He swore his doctors and his inner circle to absolute secrecy. He smiled his famous, boyish smirk for the paparazzi. He continued to sign multi-million-dollar contracts, shaking the hands of studio executives while praying they wouldn't notice the slight, involuntary tremor in his fingers. He was embarking on a massive psychological war of deception. But carrying a secret of that magnitude, carrying the heavy, terrifying knowledge of your own physical demise while pretending to be invincible, requires an emotional toll that no human mind can sustain for long. The fear was a monster living in his chest, and to keep the monster quiet, Michael turned to the only thing that could numb the terror and temporarily still his trembling hands. He didn't turn to a doctor. He didn't turn to a therapist. He turned to the bottle. The golden boy of the 1980s, the beloved idol of American television, was about to plunge into a dark, desperate, and heavily intoxicated abyss. He was about to begin a 7-year secret war that would test the absolute limits of his sanity and push his marriage to the very edge of destruction. The secret war and the lifeline of love. There is a specific, suffocating gravity to carrying a massive secret. It does not just weigh on your mind. It physically alters the way you move through the world. You become a fugitive in your own life, constantly looking over your shoulder, terrified that a single slip of the tongue or a momentary lapse in concentration will completely destroy the empire you have built. For 7 excruciating years, from 1991 to 1998, Michael J. Fox fought the most grueling, terrifying war of his entire existence, and he fought it entirely in the dark. He had made the desperate decision to hide his Parkinson's diagnosis from the studios, the press, and his millions of adoring fans. But hiding a neurodegenerative disease that directly attacks your motor skills while working as the highest-paid physical comedic actor in the world requires a level of daily, agonizing calculation that borders on psychological torture. Every single day on a movie set became a terrifying tightrope walk. Michael had to perfectly time his doses of Cinemet, a medication that temporarily replaces the brain's dopamine and stops the tremors. The pills had a highly unpredictable on and off window. If the lighting crew took too long to set up a shot or the director called for too many retakes, Michael could physically feel the medication wearing off. He could feel the sinister fluttering creeping back into his left hand. When the tremor broke through, he had to improvise with desperate brilliance. Watch his performances in films like The American President or his return to television in the hit 1996 series Spin City. You will notice that his left hand is almost always occupied. He is constantly holding a rolled-up newspaper, a coffee cup, or a briefcase. If he didn't have a prop, he would jam his left hand deep into his pants pocket, clenching his fist so tightly that his fingernails dug into his own palm. To the audience at home, it looked like the casual, effortless swagger of a confident leading man. They thought he was simply acting. They did not know they were watching a man clinging to the edge of a cliff by his fingernails absolutely terrified of falling. "I was terrified," Michael later admitted, stripping away the illusion of his famous charm. "I was so scared that someone would notice. If my hand started shaking, I would just pace the room. I made my character hyperactive. I used the disease and disguised it as acting. But inside, I was living in absolute fear." The human mind is not designed to sustain that level of constant, high-stakes adrenaline and paranoia. The sheer emotional exhaustion of lying to everyone around him, combined with the paralyzing terror of what his body was inevitably going to become, began to violently tear him apart from the inside out. To silence the roaring monster of anxiety in his head, Michael sought out a chemical anesthetic. He did not turn to therapy. He turned to the bottle. The boy who had charmed the world with his bright, clean-cut innocence plunged into a dark, desperate battle with alcoholism. He began drinking heavily, hiding empty bottles around his house, using the alcohol to numb his brain and temporarily forget the terrifying, incurable reality of his diagnosis. He was isolating himself from his friends, his colleagues, and most tragically, from his own family. He was drowning, and he was dragging his beautiful, brilliant wife, Tracy Pollan, down into the dark waters with him. In Hollywood, marriages are notoriously fragile. They are often built on the shifting sands of vanity and convenience. When a superstar husband receives a devastating medical diagnosis and subsequently spirals into severe, destructive alcoholism, the typical Hollywood script dictates that the wife calls a lawyer, issues a polite public statement, and walks away to protect her own peace. But Tracy Pollan was not reading from a Hollywood script. She was reading from the sacred, unbreakable vows she had made at the altar in sickness and in health. The absolute turning point of Michael's entire life, the moment that separates the tragedy from the triumph, occurred in 1992, after a particularly dark night of drinking. Michael had come home incredibly late, completely intoxicated. He passed out on the living room sofa, holding a beer. The beer spilled, slowly soaking into the expensive rug beneath him. The next morning, Michael woke up to the scene of profound, humiliating patheticness. His 1-year-old son, Sam, was crawling over his hungover, beer-soaked body. And standing right above him, looking down, was Tracy. This is the moment where most wives would scream. This is the moment where the plates are thrown, the ultimatums are delivered, and the marriage ends in a fiery explosion of well-deserved anger. But Tracy didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. Instead, she looked at the biggest movie star in the world with a devastating, piercing combination of pity and absolute boredom. Michael later recalled this agonizing, life-saving moment with complete clarity. She didn't panic. She didn't yell. She just looked at me, and she asked one simple question. "Is this what you want? Is this what you want to be?" And then she just turned around and walked out of the room. That single, quiet question hit Michael harder than a freight train. It shattered the massive, fragile ego of the Hollywood superstar. The anger he could have defended against. He could have argued back. But her quiet disappointment, her refusal to enable his self-pity, that pierced his soul. He realized, with terrifying clarity, that the alcohol was not protecting him from Parkinson's. It was actively destroying the only thing that actually mattered, his family. The universe was going to take away his physical movement, but he was the one choosing to throw away his wife and his son. On that very day, Michael J. Fox made a decision that saved his life. He sought help. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous. He poured the liquor down the drain and committed to absolute, uncompromising sobriety. He has not taken a single drop of alcohol since that morning in 1992. He finally stopped running from a monster, and he turned around to face it. With a sober mind, the tremendous, unconditional love of his wife became his ultimate sanctuary. Tracy did not cure his Parkinson's. No one could. But she cured his fear. She held his trembling hand and told him that she did not care if he could no longer skateboard, or if he could no longer act, or if he could no longer walk. She loved the man, not the kinetic motion. Armed with the profound, bulletproof armor of his wife's devotion, Michael managed to sustain the secret for a few more years, successfully starring in Spin City and winning more Emmy Awards. But as the calendar pushed toward the late 1990s, the neurological thief grew stronger. The tremors became more violent. The stiffness became harder to disguise with a coffee cup or a script. The medication required to control the symptoms was causing severe, uncontrollable dyskinesia, the wild, rocking body movements that would eventually become his public reality. The secret war was becoming mathematically impossible to win. In 1998, after 7 years of hiding in the shadows, Michael realized that the time for deception was over. He could no longer live a lie. The boy who was famous for moving fast had to finally stop, stand still in front of the entire world, and reveal the broken, trembling truth. He was about to step in front of the cameras, take off the mask, and willingly surrender the crown of the Hollywood leading man. But in doing so, he was about to step into a role that was infinitely more powerful, infinitely more important, and vastly more heroic than anything he had ever played on a movie screen. The confession, the hearing, and the naked truth. There's an old, profound saying that a secret is merely a prison whose walls are built entirely by the mind. For 7 years, Michael J. Fox had lived inside a terrifying, suffocating solitary confinement of his own making. He had successfully convinced the world that he was still the invincible, fast-talking, perfectly synchronized star of the 1980s. But the absolute exhaustion of maintaining that illusion, of constantly gripping props to hide his tremors, of timing his medication down to precise second, of lying to his friends as fans, had brought him to the very edge of physical and spiritual collapse. He realized that the only way to truly survive the disease was to stop hiding from it. In November 1998, the illusionist finally decided to drop the curtain. Michael gave an exclusive interview to People magazine and sat down with Barbara Walters to share his secret with the globe. When the news broke, the collective shock that rippled through the cultural landscape was staggering. The public simply could not reconcile the agonizing medical reality of Parkinson's disease with the immortal, boyish image of Marty McFly. To the audience, Michael J. Fox was the eternal teenager who rode a hoverboard through the future. The idea that this vibrant, kinetic icon had been quietly battling an incurable, degenerative brain disease for 7 years felt like a cruel glitch in the matrix of reality. But for Michael, the moment the magazine hit the newsstands, an incredible, unexpected sensation washed over him. It was not fear. It was not shame. It was absolute, overwhelming relief. Reflecting on the profound liberation of telling the truth, Michael later delivered a quote that captures a heavy, agonizing burden of deception. It was a secret that was keeping me awake. It was a secret that was slowly destroying me. Once I told the world, it was like I could finally sleep. I didn't want the disease to own me anymore. I wanted to own it. The only way to own it was to step into the light. Stepping into the light, however, required him to make the ultimate professional sacrifice. By the year 2000, the progression of the disease and the severe side effects of his medication, particularly dyskinesia, which causes wild, uncontrollable rocking and swaying of the body, made the grueling schedule of leading a television show physically impossible. Michael announced his retirement from Spin City. He packed up his dressing room, said a tearful goodbye to his castmates, and officially stepped down from his throne as the king of television comedy. Many people in the industry assumed this was a tragic, melancholic end of Michael J. Fox's story. They assumed the aging star would retreat to a quiet, heavily guarded estate, pulling the blind shut to hide his fading physical abilities from the merciless judgment of the public eye. But they fundamentally misunderstood the resilience of the boy from Canada. They forgot that when Michael gets backed into a corner, he does not surrender. He fights back. If he could no longer use his body to entertain the world, he was going to use his broken body to change the world. In September of 1999, Michael traveled to Washington, D.C. to testify before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee. His goal was to plead for increased government funding for Parkinson's research. What happened in that hearing room remains one of the most powerful, breathtakingly courageous moments in the modern history of public advocacy. It is a moment that redefines the very concept of heroism. When Michael sat down at the heavy wooden table in front of the microphones, surrounded by stern politicians and blinding camera flashes, the entire world was watching. And as he began to read his statement, the audience noticed something incredibly jarring. Michael was swaying violently. His shoulders were rocking back and forth in an extreme, erratic rhythm. His head bobbed uncontrollably. He struggled to hold the pieces of paper in his hands. It was difficult to watch. It was uncomfortable. It completely shattered the polished, flawless image of the Hollywood superstar. For years, the cynical tabloid media had whispered about his condition, but seeing it raw, unfiltered, and intensely magnified on national television was profoundly shocking. Some cruel critics later accused him of acting, claiming he was exaggerating his symptoms to manipulate the politicians and gain sympathy. But the truth behind that violent physical display was far more profound and infinitely more heartbreaking. Michael had not exaggerated his symptoms. He had made a deliberate, incredibly brave decision that morning in his hotel room. He had intentionally chosen not to take his medication before the hearing. He knew that the Cinemet pills would suppress the tremors and allow him to present a calm, composed, normal face to the Senate. But he also knew that presenting a normal face was a lie. If he took the pills, the politicians would look at him and think, well, Parkinson's doesn't look that bad. He looks fine. Michael refused to make them comfortable. He wanted the lawmakers, the media, and the millions of people watching at home to look directly at the monster. He wanted them to see the ugly, agonizing, physical reality of the disease that was ravaging his body and the bodies of millions of ordinary, invisible people around the world. He later explained the staggering act of vulnerability in his memoir. I had made a deliberate choice to appear before the subcommittee without medication. It seemed to me that this occasion demanded that my testimony about the effect of the disease be seen as well as heard. For people who had never observed me in this kind of shape, the transformation must have been startling. It takes an unimaginable level of courage for a man whose entire life, fortune, and identity were built on the absolute perfection of physical control to voluntarily sit in front of the world's cameras and allow himself to be completely, violently out of control. He stripped away every ounce of vanity. He sacrificed the Hollywood ego. He essentially martyred his own public image for the sake of the greater good. In the year 2000, utilizing his massive global platform, he launched the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. He approached the foundation with the exact same frantic, unstoppable kinetic energy that he had once used to shoot two massive projects simultaneously in 1985. But this time, he wasn't running for box office glory. He was running to save lives. He hired the brightest scientific minds, streamlined the sluggish, bureaucratic funding processes of medical research, and fundamentally revolutionized how diseases are studied in the modern era. Today, his foundation is the largest nonprofit funder of Parkinson's drug development in the world. They have raised and funded over $2 billion in global research. They have catalyzed massive breakthroughs in understanding the genetic and biological markers of the disease. The boy who played a time traveler on screen actually managed to alter the future in real life. When you look at the sheer magnitude of what is built, a profound, almost mystical realization begins to take shape. The universe did not give Michael J. Fox his charm, his fame, and his billions of dollars just so he could be a movie star. The fame was merely a tool. The movies were simply the vehicle designed to put him on a high enough mountain so that when he finally spoke about this terrible disease, the entire planet would be forced to listen. He had lost his career as a traditional leading man, but in the ashes of that loss, he discovered a mission of absolute historical magnitude. The actor had taken his final bow, but the true hero, the broken, trembling, unbreakable titan, was just beginning his finest hour. The gravity of survival, the kitchen floor, and the loss of the wheelchair. For the young and the healthy, gravity is an invisible, entirely forgotten force. We walk down a flight of stairs, we reach for a cup of coffee, we step off a curb, and we do it all with a subconscious, absolute trust in our own bodies. We never stop to consider the miraculous, lightning-fast neurological calculations required just to remain upright. But for a man living with advanced Parkinson's disease, gravity transforms from a natural law into a relentless, daily predator. As Michael J. Fox navigated through his 50s and approached his 60s, the disease that had been quietly stalking him for 3 decades began to aggressively collect its debts. Parkinson's does not merely make the hands tremble. It systematically dismantles the body's spatial awareness. It steals the autonomic reflexes that tell a human being how to catch themselves when they stumble. When a normal person trips, their hands instantly shoot out to brace for the impact. When a Parkinson's patient trips, they simply fall like a felled tree, crashing heavily into the unforgiving earth. The boy who was once famous for skateboarding behind moving cars and executing flawless, gravity-defying physical comedy was now forced to treat a simple rug or a slightly uneven floorboard as a potentially lethal obstacle. The physical toll on his body became unimaginably brutal. Because of his collapsing balance and freezing gait, Michael began to fall, and fall, and fall again. Over the course of a few years, he shattered his arm, he broke his shoulder, he smashed his orbital bone in his cheek, he broke his hand. His body became a roadmap of surgical scars and metal pins. But the universe, it seemed, was not yet finished testing the absolute limits of his endurance. In 2018, a completely unrelated, terrifying medical crisis emerged. Doctors discovered a massive, rapidly growing tumor on Michael's spinal cord. If left untreated, the tumor would permanently paralyze him from the waist down. He was forced to undergo an intensely dangerous, high-stakes spinal surgery to remove the mass. The surgery was a success, but the recovery was agonizing. He had to spend months in grueling physical therapy, essentially learning how to walk all over again. He approached the rehabilitation with his trademark, unbreakable optimism. By the end of the summer, he had recovered enough to be left alone in his New York apartment for a few days while his family was away. He was scheduled to film a cameo in a movie the very next morning. He felt a triumphant surge of pride. He had beaten the tumor. He had learned to walk again. He was going back to work. And then, in the early hours of an August morning in 2018, he walked into his kitchen. His foot caught on the floor. His brain failed to send a signal to his hands. Michael went down hard, violently smashing his upper arm against the cold tile floor, shattering the bone so completely that it required a massive metal plate and 19 screws to repair. As he lay there on the kitchen floor, completely alone, waiting for an ambulance, the physical agony of the shattered bone was completely eclipsed by a profound, overwhelming psychological break. For nearly 30 years, Michael J. Fox had been the undisputed poster child for positive thinking. He had smiled through the tremors. He had raised billions of dollars. He had told the world that Parkinson's was a gift. But lying on that cold tile, the armor of optimism finally completely shattered. Recalling that specific, devastating morning, Michael shared a quote of such profound, unvarnished darkness that it shocked everyone who heard it. I was leaning against the wall in my kitchen, waiting for the ambulance, and I felt like this is as low as it gets for me. It was when I questioned everything. I said, I can't put a shiny face on this. There's no bright side to this, no upside. This is just all regret and pain. I realized I was out of the lemonade business. I'm out of the lemonade business. For the audiences watching at home, especially those navigating the grueling, often demoralizing realities of chronic illness and advanced age, this confession is incredibly important. It is important because it is real. Toxic positivity demands that we smile through our suffering. But Michael J. Fox permitted himself, and by extension permitted all of us, to admit that sometimes life is just unbearably cruel. Sometimes you are simply allowed to cry on the kitchen floor. He plummeted into a dark depression. He wondered if he had been selling the world a false bill of goods with his relentless hope. But as the weeks passed and the broken bones slowly began to knit itself back together, the unparalleled love of his wife, Tracy, and their 4 children surrounded him once again. They did not demand that he be happy. They simply sat with him in the dark. And in that darkness, Michael discovered profound, life-altering philosophical truth. He realized that optimism is not a magical spell that prevents bad things from happening. Optimism is a muscle, and it requires fuel to function. With gratitude, optimism is sustainable, he would later write, delivering what is perhaps the most powerful thesis of his entire life. If you can find something to be grateful for, then you can find something to look forward to, and you carry on. He found his gratitude. He was grateful for Tracy. He was grateful that he could still laugh. He was grateful for the millions of lives his foundation was helping. He crawled out of the abyss, not as a blind optimist, but as a deeply scarred, realistic survivor. But as he entered the year 2020, a final, heartbreaking professional reality was quietly taking shape. Throughout the 2010s, Michael had continued to act, delivering brilliant, Emmy-nominated guest performances on critically acclaimed shows like The Good Wife. He had used his tremors as part of his characters, turning his physical limitations into brilliant acting choices. But acting requires more than just physical presence. It requires a razor-sharp memory. Remember the boy from part 1 of our story. The boy who was trapped in the terrifying cage of a childhood stutter. The boy who discovered that if he stood on a stage and memorized the lines of a script, the stutter vanished. Acting and memorizing dialogue was his ultimate superpower. It was the wheelchair that allowed the broken boy to run. While shooting a television cameo in 2020, Michael experienced something terrifying. He was handed a script with just a few lines of dialogue. He looked at the words. He tried to lock them into his mind, but the words simply evaporated. The disease, combined with age, was finally attacking his short-term memory. The man who had once memorized entire pages of rapid-fire dialogue while sleeping 2 hours a night in 1985 could no longer remember a single sentence in 2020. For an actor, losing your ability to memorize lines is the ultimate death knell. It is the moment the stage lights are permanently turned off. But how did Michael react? Did he rage against the unfairness of the universe? Did he sink back into the depression of the kitchen floor? No. He experienced a moment of profound, breathtaking grace. He thought of the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, specifically a scene where Leonardo DiCaprio's character forgets his lines and has a violent, angry breakdown in his trailer. Michael realized he didn't want to be angry. I thought of that scene, Michael calmly recalled, and I just went, I can't do this anymore. It's time. And it was peaceful. In 2020, Michael J. Fox officially and permanently retired from acting. He didn't make a massive, dramatic spectacle of it. He didn't demand pity. He simply folded up the wheelchair that had served him so beautifully for 40 years, thanked it for the ride, and quietly walked away. He accepted that the era of entertaining the world was over. The boy who had spent his entire life running at supersonic speeds, desperately trying to outrun his bullies, his poverty, and eventually his own disease, had finally, completely stopped. And as he stood there in the stillness, battered, broken, and stripped of his Hollywood crown, he was about to discover that the absolute best, most peaceful chapter of his entire existence was waiting for him just around the corner. The master of the present and the ultimate time traveler. There is a profound, almost mystical serenity that descends upon a warrior when he finally realizes he no longer needs to fight the current. For decades, Michael J. Fox swam against a freezing, relentless tide. He fought the bullies of his youth by moving faster. He fought the unforgiving machinery of Hollywood by working harder. And for over 35 years, he fought the invisible neurological thief inside his own brain by trying to outsmart it, outact it, and eventually outfund it. But as we look at Michael J. Fox today, in the year 2026, at 64 years old, the frantic, desperate fighting has finally ceased. The physical toll of his decades-long battle is undeniable, and true to the courageous promise he made himself in the late 1990s, he makes absolutely no attempt to hide it. His movements are heavily restricted. He often relies on a wheelchair to navigate the world, protecting his fragile, repeatedly broken bones from a merciless pull of gravity. The voice that once fired off comedic punchlines with the electric speed of a machine gun now requires immense, deliberate effort just to produce a raspy, quiet whisper. To look at his physical frame is to see a man who has endured a relentless, brutal siege. But if you look past the trembling hands, and if you look deeply into his eyes, you will not find a victim. You will find a king who has completely conquered his own kingdom. In early 2026, Michael made a rare, surprise appearance at a major Hollywood award ceremony. He was escorted onto the stage by his son, Sam. As the spotlight caught him, the entire room of Hollywood elites, the biggest, wealthiest, and most powerful stars on the planet, immediately rose to their feet. The standing ovation lasted for an incredibly long, deeply emotional stretch of time. Many in the audience had tears streaming down their faces. As Michael looked out at the glittering crowd and flashed a gentle peace sign, a profound realization washed over the room. They were not giving a standing ovation to Alex P. Keaton. They were not cheering for Marty McFly. They were not applauding a movie star. They were bowing to a survivor. They were honoring a man who took the worst possible hand the universe could deal and played it with such breathtaking grace, dignity, and relentless optimism that it permanently elevated the human condition. He recently returned to the screen for a brief, poignant role in the Apple TV series Shrinking, playing a man who is also navigating life with Parkinson's disease. He is no longer using his acting to hide his reality. He is using his reality to educate the world. He is surrounded by an impenetrable, magnificent fortress of love. His wife, Tracy Pollan, who looked at him on a beer-soaked rug in 1992 and refused to let him drown, is still standing right beside him. Their marriage, forged in the fires of chronic, debilitating illness, has survived nearly 4 decades in industry where marriages routinely dissolve over minor inconveniences. His 4 children are grown, fierce, and fiercely protective of their father. When he sits in his home, surrounded by his family, the man who was once famous for moving at the speed of light has finally mastered the exquisite, beautiful art of sitting perfectly still. There's a question that journalists have asked Michael J. Fox repeatedly over the years. It is a question rooted in the mythology of his most famous film. They asked him, if you had a real DeLorean, if you could actually travel back in time to 1991, would you warn yourself? Would you erase the Parkinson's diagnosis? Would you choose a life without the disease? For a long time, the world assumed his answer would be a desperate, resounding yes. Who would want to erase 35 years of trembling, fractured bones, and physical exhaustion? But Michael's answer is perhaps the most profound, deeply philosophical truth he has ever delivered. No, he says quietly, I wouldn't change it. Parkinson's is the gift that keeps on taking, but it is a gift because it forced me to become the man I was always supposed to be. If I hadn't gotten sick, I would have just been a wealthy, arrogant Hollywood actor. This disease gave me empathy. It gave me my foundation. It gave me a purpose that is so much bigger than myself. This is the ultimate, mind-bending paradox of his existence. The disease that was designed to completely destroy him is the exact same thing that made him immortal. The boy who played a time traveler eventually discovered the ultimate secret of time. You cannot run from the future, and you cannot rewrite the past. The only thing you actually control is how you behave in the present moment. By surrendering his desperate need to control his physical body, he gained absolute, total control over his soul. Michael J. Fox did not just survive Parkinson's disease. He fundamentally humiliated it. He took a dark, terrifying neurological shadow and used it to raise $2 billion, changing the landscape of medical science forever. He proved to the world that you can lose your balance, you can lose your voice, and you can lose your ability to walk. But as long as you can still find a reason to be grateful, your spirit will remain entirely bulletproof. The skateboard has been put away. The DeLorean is parked. The boy who never stopped running has finally come to rest. And as he sits in the quiet warmth of his family, holding his wife's hand. He leaves us with a legacy that will echo long after the movie's screens go dark. He leaves us with the unshakable truth that the greatest superpower a human being can possess is not the ability to never fall down. It is a profound, magnificent grace of knowing how to smile when you're trying to stand back up. As the screen fades to black on the extraordinary, deeply inspiring journey of Michael J. Fox, the camera turns away from the Hollywood legend and it focuses gently on you. Michael's story is a profound, beautiful reminder of the harsh realities we all must face as the clock ticks forward. Whether we are battling a chronic illness, navigating the physical limitations of aging, or simply watching the bodies we once trusted begin to slow down, we are all eventually forced to confront the loss of our own youth. But Michael teaches us a vital, life-saving lesson. The decay of the body does not mean the decay of the spirit. He showed us that even in our darkest, most physically painful moments, if we can find just one small thing to be grateful for, optimism is still possible. What about you? As you navigate the changing seasons of your own life, how you handle the days when your body doesn't want to cooperate with your mind? When life forces you to slow down, where do you find your peace? What is the gratitude that keeps your optimism alive when things get tough? Please, take a moment to share your stories, your daily struggles, and your hard-earned wisdom in the comments below. There are people reading these comments right now who are fighting their own quiet, terrifying health battles, and your words of resilience might be exactly the medicine their soul needs today. If Michael J. Fox's incredible journey moved you, if it reminded you that true heroes are not those who never tremble, but those who continue to love the world even when their hands are shaking, please leave a like on this video. Share it with someone you care about, especially someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And subscribe to our channel, because we are committed to telling the deep, unfiltered, and profoundly human stories behind the legends we thought we knew. Thank you, deeply and truly, for spending your time with us today. Remember to be kind to yourselves, find joy in the quiet moments, and no matter what life takes from you, never let it take your gratitude. Until next time.